Hello, it's Mr. Gibbs here again. Welcome to the third part of this video, which talks about the exercise 1 introduction, everything you need to know to start the BSS course. Let's jump straight into question 20, which is a little bit longer than normal. Let's have a read of the question together. It says, the boss is happy if the total turnover has exceeded 140,000 euros and upset if this is not the case. Enter a formula into E44 that shows either happy or upset by using values in cells already on this sheet. So how is the boss this month? Well, in the previous video we solved cell E29 and we already determined that the total for this month was 144,090. So back in question 13 we already have this number. Let's just have a quick refresher on how we got that number. We just added up all the widgets that were in the second column, all the transaction amounts, and then we multiplied it by 2.5. Why? Because 2.5 or €2.50 is the price of a widget, a single widget. So that gives us the total turnover. So let's return here to question 20. The question says, how is the boss? Well, has exceeded is just another term for is greater than or is more than. And the boss is upset if this is not the case. So really the boss can only be happy or upset. That means there's two possible words that can appear in this cell, or two outcomes. Let's have a look at the formula here. In E44, this is the formula. Now this uses an if statement. Now if statements are very common in Excel and there's always three parts. Now this is an example of a simple if statement. What does that mean? Well, a simple if statement means there are two possible outcomes. I mentioned earlier on about being happy or upset. Option A or option B. So two possible outcomes. So what do? Well, we type in the word if. Then for the first part of the function we need a logical test. Now the logical test can either be true or false. It can either be a yes or a no. This is the case or this is not the case. And in this particular example we see E29 greater than 140,000. Now let's just remind ourselves, E29 is up here. This was the 144,090 figure we determined earlier on. This is the total turnover. So the logical test asks the question, is this number greater than 140,000? Now you'll notice in the logical test there are three parts in there. There's this cell reference, then there's a symbol or an operator, and then there is something else, which could also be another cell reference, so in this case it's the number 140,000. But there are three things in there. This is the first part, this is the second part, and this is the third part. So if E29 is greater than 140,000, if that's true, well, we need a comma after our logical test. And if that is the case, if the number is greater than 140,000, we need the word happy in this cell, because the boss is happy if it's over 140,000. Otherwise, the boss is upset. So this is my false part. So just to recap on if statements, we have an if, a logical test, a happy, and an upset. Now I'm using the English version of Excel, and that means that we use commas between the different parts of the if statement. So you'll see one there, and there's also one here. If you're using a German version or a non-English version, you may have to use a semicolon in there. The tip here is to always check the tip down below. If the tip down below is showing you a comma, you use a comma. If it shows you a semicolon, you use a semicolon. So we have our test, our happy, our upset. Let's press enter or control enter to stay in the cell. We end up with the word happy. Why is that? Because the number's over 140,000. It's pretty straightforward. So the boss is happy this month because of that number. Now let's have a quick look at the if statement again. What else could I put in here? Well, I could put a less than, I could put a greater than, I could put an equals. Yeah, pretty straightforward. I can put a greater than or equals. I can put a less than or equals. I can also put a not equals symbol. Now the not equals symbol is the one that nobody knows about, but it exists, and there's nothing wrong with putting that in there. But we need that because we use the word exceed. So if E29 exceeds 140,000, the boss is happy, otherwise the boss is upset. Okay, let's move on to the next question, number 21. I'll zoom out slightly so I can read the question. How am I zooming out? I'm pressing Control and moving my mouse wheel as I do it. Okay, let's just zoom in again to read the question. Question 21. The yellow cell E48 is a cell to type in a number of sick days Mr. Nikielski and Mr. Gibbs have had in total so far this year. Their boss is ecstatic when this is 3 or below, satisfied when this is between 4 and 7, and perturbed, which is another word for upset, when this is more than 7. So he's very happy when it's 3 or less. He's satisfied between 4 and 7, and perturbed when this is more than 7. Enter a formula in E52 below that displays whether the boss is ecstatic, satisfied or perturbed based on the number that can be entered into the yellow cell. Enter some different test values between 1 and 10 into the yellow cell to test your formula is correct. So this works because this is the answer file. If I type in some numbers here, if I type in 3, you'll see the boss is ecstatic. If I type in 5, the boss is satisfied. And if I put in there 8, which is more than 7, the boss is perturbed. Okay, so what have we got here? We've got 3 possible outcomes. Okay, 3 possible outcomes: ecstatic, satisfied, or perturbed. Now, in the previous example, we had happy or upset. That was 2 possible outcomes. Now, generally speaking, we refer to 2 possible outcomes as a simple if statement. We have a test, a true, and a false. And for 3 possible outcomes, which is the case of question 21, we have to use something called a nested if. And the word nested simply means an if inside an if. I'll zoom in so you can see the answer. And I'll go through this answer with you. So what do we have here? As before, equals if. And the principle of a nested if statement is exactly the same as a simple if statement. We have a test, a true, and a false. So what's the first test? Well, I generally recommend that you look at the low numbers first. You don't have to, but that's my general tip for everybody, and this usually works for me. So let's look at 3 or below. That's the first possible outcome. And that is that the boss is ecstatic if the number of sick days is 3 or less. Now 3 or less is just another phrase for less than or equal to 3. So if E48, which is my cell reference, is less than or equal to 3, the boss is ecstatic. That's my first outcome, and I still have 2 left. If that's not the case, I then have another if statement, and that says if E48 is greater than 7. Now, greater than 7 is my high condition, or my high outcome. So we did the low to start with, and then we do the high. And the high condition is that the boss is perturbed if the number of sick days is greater than 7. So we've done the low, we've done the high, which says the boss is perturbed. Again, this is text, it goes inside quotation marks. What's left? Well, what's left must be in the middle. So between ecstatic and perturbed is satisfied, which is my third condition. So we do the low, which is this part. Then we do the high, which is this part. And what's left is in the middle. So high or low and high, and what's left is in the middle. In this case, we do the low first, then the high, and what's left is in the middle. Let's take a look at the answer. Currently at 8 sick days, the boss is perturbed. If you want to test this fully, the only way to do it is to go through it one number at a time. So I keep entering numbers. 1, 2, still ecstatic. 3, still ecstatic. 4, satisfied, which makes sense. 3 or below, he was ecstatic and now he's satisfied. 5, still satisfied. 6, satisfied. 7, satisfied. 8, perturbed. And if I keep on going, I end up with perturbed because they're the high numbers. So once again, how is the boss? Well, this is a nested if statement. 3 possible outcomes. First outcome are the low ones. The second outcome, the high ones. And the third outcome, what's left is in the middle. I hope you're not too perturbed by this if statement or this nested if statement. It's quite common to have if statements with multiple conditions. So the key point here is that in the previous example, the simple if statement, 2 outcomes, happy or upset. That's called a simple if. And with this one, with 3 possible outcomes, we call that a nested if. Let's move on to question 22. So, question 22, what does it say? It says, the same boss must make a final summary of the year with his head office. The final summary in cell E56, which is this one, must show the phrase a good year if he was happy about the total turnover and also ecstatic about the number of sick days. Both these conditions must be true in order for it to be a good year. Anything else, and the final summary must show the phrase could be better. So what have we got here? Well, how many outcomes are there? How many possibilities are there? Well, we either have a good year or it could be better. Yeah. So what makes up a good year? Well, a good year is made up by happy and ecstatic. So those 2 things must be true. So now we have 2 conditions that must be true in order for outcome 1, or a true condition, and everything else could be better. So let's take a look at the answer for this particular question. I'll zoom in again so you can see this in more detail. What do we have here? Well, here's my if statement. It's a logical test, just like before. We have a true and a false, but this logical test is the whole of this statement here. Now, these 2 things must be true. So E44 must be happy. E52 must be ecstatic. So if this one is true and this one is true, it's a good year. So you'll see here we have the word and then we have an open bracket, which is green, and a closed bracket here, or closed parenthesis, which is green here. Okay, so both of these conditions must be true for a true outcome. So it's only a good year if E44 is happy, and E52 is ecstatic. So what's the difference between this one and the previous one? Well, in the previous if statements, we only had one condition which had to be true in order to be a true condition for the if statement. So this one here, in the previous examples, we only needed one true condition. Now we need two things to be true. It's quite possible that you might have 3, 4, 5 or 6 or more things that need to be true, and you can just keep adding commas along here, and eventually you can just keep typing all of the things that need to be true to get a true condition. So E44 has to be happy and E52 has to be ecstatic to get a good year. Otherwise, it could be better. So if this is false, all this is false, could be better, is the answer we'll get. The hard thing about AND, which is a function in itself, is the way in which you write it, because we naturally say if E44 is happy and E52 is ecstatic. Now the way in which you write this in Excel, unfortunately, you have to write the AND before the first condition. So you say if and E44 happy, E52 ecstatic. So even though the word AND is actually before the first condition, it's still, when we read it, it still goes between those two things. So if E44 is happy and E52 is ecstatic, then it's a good year. Well, let's test that out. So at the moment, the final summary is could be better. Why is that the case? Well, one of those two conditions must be false. So which one is it? Well, the boss must be happy based on the total turnover and ecstatic about the sick days. Well, the sick days are currently perturbed, so let's lower that number to 2, and you'll see we have the word ecstatic, and now down here you'll see a good year appears because both conditions are true. We have a happy up here and we have an ecstatic in here, so that's a good year. If any one of those two things changes, for example, if I were to lower this to say 50 euros, ridiculously low figure, this becomes upset. The final summary could be better. I'll just undo my turnover put it back to 144,000, and now you'll see the numbers return to the way they were before. Okay, let's look at the last question, which is question 23. The controller is asked in the first column, person in the range of cells from A5 to A104. How many blank cells are there? Now, if you've been following these videos, you will know that we have one blank cell in that first column. But how do I get Excel to tell me how many blank cells there are in a range? Well, this is the function. We have to count blank, or look for the blanks and count them up. So there's the function, there's my range of cells. So in this range, how many cells are blank? Well, 1. We know it's 1 because down here in cell A81, there's my blank cell. So just to reiterate, the function is count blank A5 A104. That's it for this exercise. If you need to go over it again, please do so. Don't forget to pause the video if you need to stop and take a look at the formula or the function. Play it as many times as you need to in order to fully understand how this exercise works.